Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kathy Charner, the Editor-in-Chief of Books at NAEYC. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar that celebrates our newest book, Nurturing Creativity, an Essential Mindset for Young Children's Learning. The authors of this book, Rebecca Isbell and Sonia Yoshizawa, are here with us today to talk about what creativity is and to describe some of the ways that you can nurture young children's creativity in your classroom. Our first presenter, Rebecca Isbell, is an early childhood consultant and professor emerita of early childhood education at East Tennessee State University. She has authored numerous books and articles and presents on topics related to young children, creative thinking, storytelling, and the creative arts. Our second presenter, Sonia Yoshizawa, is a doctoral student in early childhood education at East Tennessee State University. A co-author of STEM Learning with Young Children, Inquiry Teaching with Ramps and Pathways, she conducts inquiry-based STEM trainings and presentations for teachers. After Sonia and Rebecca talk about creativity, we will have time for questions. But before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping details. During the webinar, we will have two simple polls. The polls will pop up on your screen so you can answer them, and then we will share the results with you. If you have questions you want to ask the presenters, write them in the question box that's on the lower left-hand side of your screen. The authors will answer your questions at the end of the presentation. Some people using a telephone line may experience a slight delay. You will have the best experience using the sound on your computer. Thanks again for joining us this afternoon. Now let's get started. Rebecca and Sonia, over to you.
Welcome. Hello, everyone. We are so pleased that you are here with us this afternoon. Sonia and I have been studying, researching, and observing creativity for a number of years. We are very excited about sharing some of our findings with you today. We're going to share some of the points that we think are really important for early childhood educators, but we also want to let you know that more detail and many more creative possibilities are included in our book, where you can find additional ideas and many more things that you can actually apply in your classroom. But before we get started, we'd like to know a little bit about you. So one of the questions that we'd like to ask you is, what age group do you work with every day? While you're answering that question, Sonia and I are going to continue our discussion and share with you some other things that we think are important. So why do we need creativity today? Why do we need to be more creative? Why do we need to be able to think in creative ways? And we found that there were many reasons why that might be true, but we wanted to share with you just some of the ones that we know to be essential and very important. First of all, things are changing so rapidly in our world today. Things are happening at such a speed that we can't even imagine what the world is going to be like in 20 years when the young children in our classroom are entering the workforce, are establishing families and relationships. There's also lots and lots of new information that is coming to us. And there are new problems to solve, things that we've never solved before. And no longer can we go to a book and find the answer. It will require us to think in new and innovative ways to accomplish methods to solve these problems. We're also living in a global world where we've often talked about the shrinking size of the world. What it means is that anything that happens with us affects the rest of the world, and what happens in the rest of the world affects us as well. And so we are seeing changes and developments at an enormously fast speed, one that we cannot even predict for the future.
I see now a lot of people responding. Thank you so much. We see people from, we see infant and toddler, preschool, pre-K teachers, We see 5-year-old kindergarten readiness teachers. Well, welcome. We see infant and toddler, so we have all.
Yes, that's wonderful. One of the wonderful things about early childhood is that we get to start out with them at the very beginning. And that's so important that we establish a creative environment for them when they're in infancy all the way on up through kindergarten and in the primary grades as well.
Now that we have described why creativity is so important, we would like you to think what creativity means to you. Now, sometimes we ask people to tell us one word to describe creativity, and we get lots of different responses. Rebecca, can you give me some examples of what people say about what is creativity?
Well, many people tell us that they're unique ideas, that they're a little eccentric sometimes, that they're rare ideas, and maybe sometimes even a little weird. They're out of the box, they're new, they're exceptional ideas. What others do you have, Sonia?
Well, I think like flexible thinking, problem solving, would that be too?
Yes. Exceptional ideas. That's something out of the ordinary.
Definitely. Now, Rebecca and I, we've been doing the same thing. We've been brainstorming what is creativity? What does it mean for us? So what we did, we read other authors, speakers, and theorists' definition of creativity. And I think we believe we came up with a good definition. Here it is. Creativity is to actively produce ideas, inventing or making something for the first time, or coming up with unique and different ways of expressing their thinking. The creative act is meaning for the child, and we put a lot of importance in this meaningful, which is something valuable for the children.
And Sonia, one of the things that we talked about related to creativity is creativity is very different as we think about it with young children. And the point in here is something that the child has done for the first time. For example, all of us have seen a young child draw a house with 2 lines and a triangle on top. It's something we see year after year, and sometimes we don't really think about that as being creative because we've seen it before, we know what that looks like. But what we as early childhood educators need to remember is that if this is the first time this child has drawn a house in this way, it is a creative act for them. And so we want to value it, we want to treasure it, and we want to let them know what great thinkers they are. At the time when we see such a growing need for creativity in our country and around the world, we are actually seeing a decline in creativity. And this is of concern to all of us, because we know that to survive and to be successful in the future, we're going to need creative thinkers. So what does the research tell us about that? E. Paul Torrance, who was one of the early people who studied creativity in young children, said that 4- and 5-year-olds are the most creative people in the world. And all of you teachers who are working with that age group, you can say, boy, I'm working with the most creative people in the world. But a concern for all of us came from Kim's research, who was a student of Torrance. And she did research in 1999 to follow up and to see if today's children are as creative as they were when Torrance first began talking about the amazing abilities of creative children. And in 1999, she studied them, and she found that children were less creative than they had been during Torrance's period. And then she went back in 2011 and studied them again. And to her surprise and to our concern was that children were less creative today than they were in 1999. When children were asked questions that required creative thinking, they came up with less original ideas. They were less able to solve problems. And another thing, they didn't view themselves as being creative. When they were asked if they were creative, they would say, no, we're not creative. Where when Torrance did his test in the 1990s, almost 95% of the children said We are creative.
That is really interesting. Now, let's think about the reasons why creativity is declining. Well, I remember once upon a time, young children used to play all day long. I myself remember going to the preschool, but I honestly believe I was going there because my mission was to play with all my friends and take care of the pet turtle and the rabbit, which I was not supposed to. But that was my way of playing. And now when we look at the children today, we see children having fewer opportunities to play. We see that their schedule is timed, indoors and outdoors. We are constantly saying, 5 more minutes. Also, children's arts are less valued. And we think this is not because teachers are dismissing children's creative work. It is because there's no time for teachers to sit down with every child and listen to their creative ideas and the process of their work. Teachers then are worried about the next academic level or leaving someone behind that they don't want to. So they focus on test taking, they focus on practice taking tests, and so on. And the more teachers deal with time constraints, the more concerns grow about children and the world they live. And then sadly, creativity goes downhill.
Many fewer people who study the future and look at what we can predict about what's going to happen in the next 20 and 30 and 40 and 50 years have talked about what kinds of skills and abilities are today's children going to need to be successful in their future. And this is a very important question for us as early childhood educators because we want to help children to be able to be successful not only in our classrooms today and not only in elementary, but in life, where they are able to go out into the world and be successful. So what are some of the skills, the abilities, or competencies that seem to be the most important that folks are telling us about that relate to children in the future and today? Well, one is that they need to be problem solvers. They need to be able to look at a problem, determine what the problem is, come up with a solution, a method of solving that problem, and then they need to be able to implement the solution. And then if the solution doesn't work, then they have to be flexible thinkers and go back and think again. Well, that didn't work so well. Maybe I got to come up with another idea. So they need to be flexible as well as problem solvers. And sometimes they need to come up with innovative ideas that have never been thought of before. And this requires a number of things about the environment, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on. And then overall, we need creative thinkers. Children that can be fluent in ideas, who can come up with original ideas, who can elaborate on ideas, and can find new solutions for old problems. Sonia, tell us a little bit about the 21st century skills.
Sure. I'm sure some people may have heard about this 21st century skills. Now, this 21st century skills, or now called 21st century learning, is a partnership formed by leaders in education, business, and policy. Now, what they have done, they have identified 4 skills that they believe to be the most important to develop in pre-K through 12th grade education, today and the future. Now, these skills are called, you got it, 4 C's. It starts with all C, or creativity, communication, collaboration, or critical thinking or problem solving. Now, these 4 C's in the classrooms are vital as they are a way of preparing children for the challenging demands of the future world. A National Education Association report in 2011 described how educators can be purposeful about implementing these 4 C's in their classroom, as well as in the community. A survey conducted by American Management Association discovered that 80% of executives agreed that students would be successful if the 4 C's were integrated into education. Now the question is, how do we implement these 4 C's with young children? With young children, creative experiences such as arts, activities, and projects provide them with many opportunities to exercise the 4 C's. Supporting a child who wishes to construct a unique structure using recyclable materials is one example of fostering their creativity. Rebecca, do you have any other example about communication and collaboration?
Well, small groups, such as learning centers, provide many opportunities for children to use their communication. Mm-hmm. For instance, one of the centers that we suggested in our book is an inventor center, where young children can go in small groups. They can look at some of the inventions that people have done over the years. They can make plans for creating their own inventions. And then there'll be loose parts and unusual pieces of equipment that they can put together and talk about what is it, how can we use it, how can we put it together. So they are, during this period when they are in the midst of their language explosion, they are having an opportunity to use their language in communication. And they are also learning how to collaborate with others. When another child doesn't understand what they're saying, they'll say, "What did you say? What does that mean?" They will ask questions and ask them to clarify what they said. And this is a wonderful way for a child to understand what is happening and if their ideas are being communicated.
Well, I can see that this collaboration and communication also leads to critical thinking.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Yes. And I hear this word problem solving always not just in the field of arts, but also in STEM, like in science and math. And children really need to learn how to problem solve, because those are the challenges that they're facing every day. Now, Rebecca, you've done a lot of work on environment. Can you tell us how environment can inspire creativity?
Well, we know that there are many things that are important in creating a wonderful, stimulating environment for young children. And some of those are the same thing for whatever area we're trying to develop. But some of them are unique for creativity. So we're going to mention a few of those and give some examples of that. And again, in our book, we have beautiful pictures of some of the types of environments that we can set up and some of the kinds of materials that you might use. First of all, our classrooms need to be beautiful places. A place where a young child can see beautiful things, a beautiful flower, a beautiful picture, things that are displayed in a beautiful way. If we want children to appreciate and enjoy aesthetically pleasing things, we have to provide them those in the environment. I think one of the most important characteristics for the environment that nurtures creativity is that it is a warm and nurturing environment. When you are doing creative
all
activities,
callers are muted and they can unmute themselves.
You have to feel that you can take a risk, that you can try something new, because you know in this environment that you will have a teacher, another child who will support you trying these things, and you know it's safe here and that you can do it. There are many opportunities for working together. Instead of things in big groups, we need to think more about one of the most powerful kinds of groups is small groups. And in a small group, a child has 3 or 4 children that they're working with, and the stress and the concern about doing things the right way and making sure that it's correct is never as great when there's 3 or 4 as when they are 15 or 16 or 17 in a group. So the small group, again, provides them an opportunity to work in a less threatening environment on projects, in centers, on particular activities that go along with a theme. So here they're able to work on these projects together. Nurturing those creative projects that come from the children's ideas. Sometimes their ideas are so marvelous, and we need to be able to listen to those, follow them, and let the children know that we believe that was a fabulous idea that they came up with. And I think we're going to do some studying on that. And let's see what we can find out about it. You can also add some unique learning centers. Of course, The studio art and blocks are always wonderful places for creativity to take place. But by adding other centers like a fitness center or a camping center or another center they haven't seen before, gives them another opportunity to think in different ways, to try things in different ways, and also to do the 4 C's that we've been talking about, communicating, collaborating as they are in those areas. And then the last one, and there are many others which you can see later, but one of these is adding a variety of materials. Young children's brain seeks out novelty. They look for things that are unusual. They want to try out new materials. So we can add to that an opportunity for them to have not a whole group of weird and strange materials they've never seen, but maybe just adding 1 or 2 new items to an area so that they are challenged to experiment with it, to play with it, and to enjoy it.
Rebecca, I have one question for you. Changing the environment that I'm used to, like in a classroom, is sometimes scary. I don't know if I'm going to fail, and I don't know if the children are going to enjoy or not. What would you have? What could you give me as an advice for that?
Well, I think that, first of all, you have to have a teacher who understands that part of being creative is taking some risk. And sometimes there's going to be some mistakes, and sometimes they're not going to work great. That's okay. We also know that sometimes just by adding one simple material to an area, the teacher can demonstrate. For instance, one that I like to add to a block area is the long cord, long tube that you use that is the vent for dryers. And it's silver, and it stretches, and it compacts. And adding that to the block area is a new material. Children have never seen that before. And so for them, it means taking a risk, trying something they've never tried before, picking up this rather scary-looking object and seeing what it could do. And if the teacher sees that they are hesitant about this and concerned about it, the teacher can add supportive statements to them to help them take the risk and try it. Wonder how it feels. Does it stretch? Can you make it teeny tiny? And so by adding those supportive statements, we help the child begin to understand that it's okay to try something you've never tried before. And I would say that to the teacher as well, that we try things that we've never tried before.
Now I'm beginning to feel like a child, which I think this is something that is very important.
Well, I think in some ways it's childlike, and I think that's a characteristic to be valued. When people say sometimes to me, "Oh, you're childlike," I'm not insulted. Right? I'm not insulted by that comment at all.
You're childish.
Yes, I take it as a compliment, because if I can have the creative idea of a young child, I feel like I've done something fabulous.
I feel a lot better now.
One of the things that we've studied over the years is to look at the characteristics of creative children. And from the very beginning of the writings that were beginning in the 60s about creativity in young children and adults, there was frequently an example given as who is creative and what it looks like. And it was interesting to note that over and over in the materials that we read, the example for a creative person was a young child. And they would say, this is how a creative person looks. Here's how they act. Here's some of their characteristics. And then they would say, this is how a young child learns. This is how a young child works. So here's some of the characteristics that we find that are not just true of young children, which they definitely are, but they are also true of creative adults and creative teachers who work with them every day. They're curious. They want to know the answer to everything. Oh my, how many days have we come home from our work and we thought, oh no, how many questions did I answer today? Because children have a million questions. Why do we do it this way? Can we do this? What if I do this? So all of those, although sometimes we get a little irritated by the number of questions, what they are indicating to us is this is a creative child who is filled with questions, who is going to want to know answers, and that is one of the things that makes them a scientist. They are also independent thinkers. Sometimes when a child seems to want our help and we give them a suggestion, and they are so kind, they listen to us and they shake their little heads because they love us because we're their teachers. But then they go ahead and do it their own way. And sometimes we think, well, they didn't listen to me at all, and maybe they didn't. But what they are showing you is that I heard what you said, but I have some of my own ideas, and I'm going to try them too. And so that independent thinker is something we really want. We want children and teenagers and adults who are capable of making independent decisions. They're playful. You give a child a new piece of material they've never had. Let's say we give them a piece of fabric. It's a nice, shiny, glittery piece of fabric. They've never seen anything quite like that before. So the first thing they do with it is they play with it. They put it on their head. They put it in front of their eyes, and they try to look through it. They drape it around their friends' shoulders. They play with the material. And we know that this is an important part of their learning as well as being a creative thinker. Adventurous, they'll try things that you never thought they might. And they are imaginative as they are doing it. They think of new possibilities. They think of another story for a character for the story. They think of another way of doing it and adding some imagination. And in general, most young children are uninhibited. Now look at those characteristics. When we look at creative teachers and we look at artists and scientists, those are some of the very same characteristics that we see in these creative people. So there are many shared characteristics that we need to understand as teachers of young children and value as teachers of young children.
I see many questions coming up below, and I hope we can answer them later. I also need to tell you that there's a handout in your page, I think, so you can download them later. Okay, now that we have learned the reason why creativity is important in young children's lives, we have also identified the characteristics of creative children and adults. Now, we would like to ask you to reflect a little bit and think about this question. Are you a creative teacher?
Often when I go into classrooms and I see a teacher doing a wonderful creative project, I say, oh, you're so creative. And often what I hear from them is, oh, I'm not creative.
Yeah, I hear that.
And I'm here to tell you today that some early childhood teachers are so creative. And it's one of the reasons I think Sonia and I enjoy working with them so much is because we enjoy seeing their creativity. But let's just look at your own self and do a little bit of reflection here. So we're going to pose some questions to you, and we'd like for you to answer them either yes or no. And the first question is, do you decide what songs and stories you will use during group time each day? Are you the person that does that? Sonia, what other?
Oh, yes, I do that all the time. I think we have to come up with songs and stories. Now, another question is, do you follow some of the children's ideas?
Oh, yes. Sometimes the children's ideas are better than mine.
That's true.
And so I like to follow them, and I like to see where it leads us. Now, for a teacher, sometimes those are a little uncertain because we don't know where they're going, and that can be scary. And again, it goes back to being able to accept that there are some risks, there may be some mistakes.
Now, do you collaborate with other teachers and coworkers?
Oh, I bet we get a lot of yeses on that one. One of the wonderful things in really good early childhood programs is that we see teams of teachers working together where they collaborate and share ideas. And if they have issues coming up, they have many voices to help them solve those problems.
And that's good when you have a coworker solving
exactly
problems
right.
together.
Yes.
Now, do you add unique materials in your classroom or centers?
Anytime we bring in something from the outdoors and we put it in the science center, anytime we bring in another prop for a center, all of those are where we're bringing in new materials that are going to challenge the children to think creatively.
Mm-hmm. And I think I read one of the questions that was saying, how much is too much? Do we bring a lot of materials or do we just bring one?
Yes. That's what we'll talk about a little bit later, but I think that's an important question because we don't want to overwhelm the child with too many new things, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. Okay. Are you playful with the children, and do you laugh together?
Oh, all the time. Yes. That's the best thing about this job, I think.
Well, I often have my students tell me, I knew where you were, I heard you laughing. And I think that that's a wonderful thing for us to laugh with the children. And where children see that we have a sense of humor, we can be playful with them, and they can be playful. And sometimes when they do something, they can laugh about it. Yes. So, if you answered yes to many of these questions, then I and Sonia are here today to tell you that you are a creative teacher. Yay! Now, I want you the next time somebody asks you when you do some marvelous activity and they say, are you creative? I hope that you'll be proud and you'll throw back your shoulders and say, I'm a creative teacher, because you are. And you're doing creative things every day. And I want you to give yourself credit for that, because we know one of the wonderful things about a creative classroom is when there's a creative teacher in the classroom. The children are so much more creative. They have so many more ideas. And so we serve for them as a model of what they're doing. So I know as teachers, we always like a list of things. All of that sounds great and wonderful, but can you tell me just some specific things that I might do in my classroom that will help nurture creativity? So Sonia and I came up with a list of 7. Now, there's probably 107. And we can just go through the list, and I can give you some of the ideas too. The first one is ask open-ended questions. I think these are very important because what you're doing is like you are communicating with teachers, with children's thinking. And there's a lot of productive questions, and there's suggestions in your book that would say what kind of questions would be very beneficial to improve that. We want to provide a variety of choices. If we want to develop independent thinkers, able to make decisions, able to solve problems, they have to start making choices when they're 2 and 3 and 4. We don't wait until they're 22 and say, okay, now it's time to make a choice. We build that creative confidence by giving them opportunities to make choices in their classroom. And also model and encourage unique ideas is very important. Yes, I think that's where the creative teacher comes in. When a creative teacher does something, she may comment, wow, that's an unusual way of doing it, but I really like that. That's pretty special. And encouraging when the child comes up with a creative idea. I've never thought of that. It's so great that you had that idea. Now let's go with it. So the teacher is modeling what a creative person is like and also accepting the children's creative ideas. And I also think value and follow children's creative interests is very important. It actually tells us that we have to listen to children and their ideas. We've talked a little bit before about taking risk and making mistakes. I think that for many of us who have been in education for a long time, we want it to do everything correctly. And we see that with even some young children who really are concerned about doing it correctly. Here's where it's our opportunity to say to them, it's okay, look, I made a mistake. I really meant to do it this way, but look, I did it a different way, and it's okay, it worked. So trying to help children understand that part of the creative process is taking risk and making mistakes. And also relax
time constraints.
Boy, that's a really hard one.
It is. It's easy to say, but it's not really easy. But try to create time. I think that is very important.
And when I look at that one, it always makes me think of a little boy who I watched in a 4-year-old classroom who was making a very intricate mask. He was cutting tiny, tiny pieces and gluing them onto this mask. And he was working so hard, and the other children would come around and look at him because they could see this was a really great project and that he was in the flow. And it came time to have lunch. And because there was an aide in the classroom, the teacher was able to say, Joshua, if you want to stay in the room with the aide and continue to work on your project, we'll go to the lunchroom and we'll bring you some food back. And that gave him an opportunity to continue his project while his mind was in the flow.
Oh, that is so important. I have so many things to say about flow, and Chicks Set Me High,
but they're going to have to read about it.
Yes, we want to answer your questions, so we're trying to hurry a little bit here. And the last one is to extend, revisit, and reflect. We have great reflective questions in our book that will probably help you to think, stop, and think about, what can I do differently?
And I think the whole idea of extending an idea, when a child comes up with an idea, helping them think about it through an extension, and then leaving it. This is really important. And coming back and revisiting it again. Yes. Being able to look at it and say, well, what do you think today? Do you think there's something else you need to do? Do you need to add something else? Do you want to do it in a different way? And that gives the child a chance to reflect on the project or the activity that they've been working on.
Well, I reflect a lot in the shower, but that leads to the next slide. I think creativity can happen anywhere. Do you agree with that?
I do. It can happen in the classroom. It can happen in centers. It can happen in the bathroom. It can happen outside. They're just and the other thing, it's not just confined to the arts. Yes. It goes across all curriculum areas, and as Sonia has mentioned, there's a focus in STEM of having creative problem solving. And so it goes across all curriculum areas.
And the tip is to find that, the time and also the moment that you can be creative together with your children.
And we want to say to you today, you as the early childhood teacher who's working with children during this critical period of development, when they are at the height of creativity, can have a tremendous positive impact on them to help them become thinkers and problem solvers in your class today, but also to be creative and problem solvers in the future.
And I think you can make it happen.
Hey, thank you so much, Rebecca and Sonia. That was a wonderful presentation. We now have some time to take questions that we've received from the participants, and thank you so much for sending your questions. If you have any others, please continue to send them until the end of the webinar. So one of the questions that came up is, what do you think about the connection between creativity and divergent and convergent thinking?
Well, convergent thinking is creative thinking, so often those are used interchangeably. But creative thinking, I think, is more than just having divergent questions and divergent answers. It involves being able to problem solve. It involves being able to deal with issues in a different way. And divergent thinking, we often think of it in more of the questioning techniques, where we have convergent questions, which are those that really have one right answer, and then divergent questions, which have more different responses. And so with creativity, of course, we're moving toward having the more divergent questions, which means that children are going to be able to come up with more fluent ideas, And that means simply just more ideas, and that they're able to, in fact, decide which ideas they think are the most successful, which one will work the best, what they might do with that.
Okay, thank you. So what do you think about how teachers might learn to take creative risks themselves? Are there things that they can do, places that they can go? What are some suggestions that you would offer teachers?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that there's so many ways, but you have to start where you are. One of the things that I say to my students in my creativity class is that you have to take small steps first. I don't want to say that you need to, the first day, just tell the children they can do whatever they want and here's the materials and go for it. I think that that would be too much, and the teacher would be thrown off balance, as would the children. So I think we have to start with small steps and build your confidence as a teacher. I think you can do lots of reading about it. I think you can attend conferences that have sessions that are specifically related to creative thinking. And I think you can brainstorm with your coworkers and other teachers about ways that you might display materials in your classroom more creatively, or you might add new activities that might take your center that's grown a little stale and has the same materials in it now that it was in there 3 or 4 years ago. Think about ways that you can update that, add some challenging materials that will help them think in a new way. So for a teacher, you have to first see where you are. If you're already doing lots of creative things, then you may be able to take a bigger risk, a bigger chance. But if you've never really tried many things to add creativity with your classroom, you need to start slow, take small steps, and treasure and value your successes.
And also one advice I can give you from my side is to think together with children. Don't think like you have to create something, that you have to change the entire thing. But as you make small changes, you can just kind of get down on their own level and think together. Sometimes it's not you, but it's the child themselves telling you, oh, this is great. Do I have something else to put with that? And that kind of gives another idea and takes you to a different step and level.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions from different people that have to do with communicating with families about the importance of creativity, the importance of play, and do you have any suggestions as to materials or articles or books or any information that teachers can send to families about the importance of creativity and play?
Well, nice that you asked. We actually believe that's very important because, as all of you know, we have many parents today who think the academics is what young children need to be successful. And what we need to help them understand is that instead of fact givers, what we need is creative thinkers. And so Sonia and I actually did the last chapter in our book that talks about reaching out to the community, being both parents and the other people who live in the community, and ways of helping them see. And we also have included, I think, 7 or 8 different types of parent meetings that you can have, or handouts that you can send to parents that talk to them about the importance of creative thinking and how this problem-solving ability will help their children as they progress. We're really lucky because right now there is so much attention on people developing their creative skills. And I hear over and over in newscasts and on television programs the fact that we need to have people who are thinkers and who are able to solve problems and are able to adapt to new possibilities and new ideas. So I think we have a lot of momentum going now in the press and lots of articles, which we do have an extensive list of references in our book, I think 10 pages of references that talk about some of those articles that you can read yourself or you can share with parents that talk about the need for creativity in the future world. Mm-hmm.
One of the participants is asking, when you think about the mindset that children need for a successful future, you talked about the characteristics of flexibility and being original, innovative thinkers. So could you explain that a little bit more and describe what that would look like in the classroom and how that relates to them being successful?
Okay.
Well, one thing I can explain, because I love to do projects with children, is let's say you're doing a project that the children are interested in. And that could be science, it could be math, it could be involving blocks. One thing that I like to do is physical science activities, such as using a code voting, marbles, and blocks, and making all these trails so that children can drop marbles and learn about science and the properties of that. Now, that kind of activity offers an opportunity for children to problem solve. For example, if the marble gets stuck between two cove moldings and the child does not know how to let the marble go to the next cove molding or the ramps, they have to find a way to solve the problem. So this is when the teacher kind of intervene or they just stand by the side and observe the child trying to problem solve them and trying to see where they can fix so that the marble can go smooth. So, and the child might have another idea. They might have some flexible ideas coming up. The child might put something else on top or put a weight so that the marble can go. Or some children, as young as 3 children, they blow on the marble because they think it's going to go faster. Well, that's their idea, so being able to be flexible, support children's ideas, and let them be creative thinkers are very important.
Kathy, the other thing is Sonia was giving you some great examples that I thought about, is that children have to have practice at this. When we first start talking about problems and how we're going to solve it, this is not a process that these children have gone through before. Mm-hmm. So they don't really understand about that. So we have a problem. We don't have enough napkins to put around for lunch today. That's the problem. Mm-hmm. How are we going to solve it? And so we have to help them begin to see that there are problems around them all day long and that we can come up with solutions, and sometimes a solution won't work, so we have to be flexible and think of another way. Or sometimes we might have a child who comes up with a totally different idea. For instance, they might say, oh, there's so many beautiful leaves outside, let's use leaves for our napkins today, which would be an innovative idea, and the teacher would have to be willing to accept that and to see that this was, in fact, a unique idea that the child came up with. But it's something that we have to do on a regular basis with children, and they begin to understand it, and they will say in their play, well, what's the problem here? What can we do to solve this problem? And so they start using the terminology that we have used.
Mm-hmm. And another important thing to add is creating this atmosphere or an environment that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to because children like to do this over and over and again. And sometimes they make mistakes over and over again. And that is fine because, this is what we do, so that they can learn.
Do we have other questions, Kathy?
We do, and as a matter of fact, we have more questions than we have time to answer. So I think we have time for one more question, which I'll ask in just a minute. But I would like to let the rest of the participants know that we will answer some folks at NAEYC will answer some of the questions, and then we will send some of the questions to you, Rebecca and Sonia, for you to answer. So we will try our very best to answer as many questions as possible. So the last question that I would like to ask is and this also there were at least 2 people who asked this question. When you think about putting materials in your classroom that foster creativity, one of the things that you mentioned was natural materials. So how critical are natural materials to fostering creativity? And if you could give some examples of some natural materials you have used and how it sparked creativity in the children.
Well, I think natural materials is very important, and it's important in a sense that it's not perfect. It's in the nature. For example, those pebbles and stones and leaves are not toys that you buy at stores, and they give plenty of opportunities to expand their ideas, their creative ideas, and transform into something that that is beyond their imagination. I like to provide things that are very open-ended, and natural materials provide that opportunity.
I was thinking about an instance in the classroom where the teacher had provided the typical paint brushes and things for the children to paint with. Mm-hmm. But in addition to that, she had also included a piece of a pine branch, which the child could paint with. And the little girl that was painting on the easel decided to use the pine branch. Mm-hmm. And she was intrigued by the fact that when you painted with a pine branch, the needles made the design look very different from what was on the paintbrush. And so it captured her imagination and helped her think about in a new way, and she created a very interesting idea built on a design, built on the fact that this pine branch with the needles made such an intricate and unusual design when she was painting.
Mm-hmm. I also love using feathers.
Yes,
because they not only they give as a tool of painting, but they give other ideas. And I remember one child that they integrated the feather inside a painting, and they put the feather together. So that was a very creative idea, to put the feather as a brush and the painting together.
Okay, thank you so much, Rebecca and Sonia, and we really appreciate this webinar. It's been very informative and great to listen to. And thank you, everyone, for participating in this webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.